Okay, so this is Ben Hall's Won by the Sword, and printed in 2014, but there was a huge kerfuffle. Essentially, the original rulebook to the game, some of the components, a number of other things, ended up messed up. I don't know the whole story behind it. I think, if I recall correctly, but I wasn't following terribly closely, I think what happened was GMT sent the wrong proofs to the printer, and the rulebook was an out of date, was not the version they intended to print, and perhaps the same with some of the cards. I've heard things from both sides of the issue, in the sense that some people who played it under the original rules said, wow, this is a really cool game, and you got to make a couple modifications, there's a couple clarifications to the rules, but otherwise it makes sense and it works fine. Other people pointed out specific issues. First of all, having to modify your cards or the charts, those got replaced as well. Those of us who are used to the old SPI games, and even other companies as well, but SPI was notorious for it, got used to, hey, sometimes things are a little wrong, you gotta fix something. Avalon Hill was pretty bad at it too in some cases. And certainly rules clarifications were a pretty common thing. However, I looked at some of the paragraphs that were, highlighted as the worst choice, the worst examples, and they were pretty incomprehensible. And then I guess the designer kind of got very upset about the whole situation. There is a whole story with this where, there were two different developers. So, the project may have gotten kind of punted to a different developer who wasn't really prepared to handle it in the same way that someone who's been working all along is. Sometimes things work out, sometimes they don't. But GMT stood up and did the right thing. This is the second game they've done this to, or for. Every now and then, there's minor issues with a GMT game, but they've gotten better and better about redeeming, whatever mistakes there were. Stuff that came out before around 2005, 2008, they generally just, hey, there's an online rulebook, deal with it, there's some errata, which is what we were always used to. In this case, and in the case of the first game that they did this with, Supreme Commander, which I feel kind of wise for not having bought to begin with. There's just not enough. I'm sure it's a fine game, but there's not enough to recommend it as opposed to, say, the old Third Reich. Except that I don't have my copy of Third Reich here. Anyway, they stepped up, reprinted everything that was screwed up. A whole new deck of cards, new pair of charts here, a couple of new rulebook, new playbook, and a small handful of counters that probably didn't need to be reprinted, but they had space on a counter sheet, I guess. However, the game was printed in 2014, and here I am halfway through 2016, and I just got it last month. Yeah. And I've put off playing. This was my number one pick for 2014 as to what I wanted to do. And they by having the mistake and the long turnaround, I'm glad they took the time on the turnaround to try to get it right. However, I do feel that the rulebook is still a little shaky. There are things. The point is that it has some very different concepts in it, and there are things that don't feel like they're adequately spelled out. There are some nice moves on it, though, and there are some kind of iffy design choices, not so much in terms of, hey, the play of the game, but in terms of the presentation of the information. In particular, I'll point you towards these Garrison markers here, which I've got the Swedes facing the opposite direction because they're just too close in color and presentation. I understand the desire to make the Garrisons look a little different from some of the other counters. They're back printed on the same counter though, and there's something a little weird there. Just in terms of it not being very effective for those of us who want to be able to grasp what the map says very easily. From what I can tell right now, the point-to-point system on the map looks readable in a way that is pretty good, and it is also not too graphically disturbing. When you look at things, I mean, I really went off on Wellington, what I call the bubble maps. Point to point, no problem, but there was no reason for that game to have huge bubbles all over the map. And I got the same disagreement with a few others. Washington's War, We the People, came up with this kind of design choice to put bubbles on the map. And honestly, a lot of the earlier games kind of followed that example. And it makes for an ugly map, and one that isn't necessarily easier to read. This one emphasizes the connections rather than the bubbles themselves. So you've got little points. The points give you interesting information, very easily and clearly represented. The only gripe I have about the map is the writing of the towns is kind of hard to find, and when you're trying to set up the scenario, there is a helpful hint for where the garrisons are. It tells you what region it's in, so you can kind of segment it down to one of a few areas, and that makes it much, much easier. Unfortunately, that same choice wasn't made with the actual columns where you set them up. They didn't put they put the town location, they didn't put the region. It would have been useful to put that in parentheses. I might add them. In general, those locations are covered with a garrison. So, and there's a numerical indicator to say, hey, this is the starting. But the presentation is to give the columns first and then the garrisons. So here's the Swedish columns, the Swedish garrisons, the Bavarian and Imperial columns, and then the Imperial and Bavarian garrisons. Okay. It's a minor point, but it does kind of gripe. It does kind of cause me to gripe a bit. Let's take a quick look at some of the map key here. I always love a map key. We got different types of locations here, and those are going to impact how many victory points you get for capturing locations, as well as how hard they are to take. You got different kinds of connectors. You've got an off-map connector. Misprint on the map too. You've got a normal connector, which is one of these regular brown lines. The off-map has an arrow. The dashed line is a difficult terrain connector. That's going to cost you a little extra in commands to move over. I don't remember if it has any other effect. I don't think so. And then you've got your major rivers here, which you can see the point-to-point is able to reflect where the major bridging opportunities would be on those rivers, and those look like they're going to become an important focus. At the same time, you also have the different provincial or small states or whatever borders colored into the map in a way that doesn't look terribly obtrusive, and it doesn't really conflict too much maybe here with what the rivers are. So from a distance this looks almost like a river, but whatever. All right, so for the units themselves, we have a bunch of pieces here. These are foraging markers. As you forage the land, it gets worse. That'll also give victory point bonuses to the person who's essentially conducting economic warfare against his opponent in his opponent's territory. Little markers, these tactical advantages. This is one of the least clear pieces of the rules that is going to require some serious interpretation. This is to mark that a city's rejected a surrender, so that you can't just keep hitting the same city for an initial surrender, which is quite likely. These are your baggage points. You've got supplies in this game, and they're actually a pretty big focus of the design. Obviously, the garrison markers. Sieges. There's markers to support 4 sieges in the game. That's probably enough. This is one of the things they reprinted. So basically, And I don't know if this is terribly well explained in the rules, but from what I can tell, you put one of these siege markers down where the siege is underway. And then you're going to use these other two types of markers to indicate the level of siege works that are required to start to perform an assault or to start demanding a final surrender of the city. And another piece which will keep track of how far along you've made it. So like, let's say you have 10 siege works required, you might have 4 of them built, you've got to get the other 6 before you can actually launch a normal assault. One of the things they did for the reprint for these counters is they put a little plus 20 on there, because maybe somebody was complaining about, hey, the number track only goes up to 20. And it is possible, I guess, for sieges to get bigger than that. I am not certain. There are some weirdnesses in the siege rules as well that are not absolutely clear to me. So yeah, a strong fortress has 34 siege works required to assault. So baked in, without any bonus cards, without anything like that, you've already got a number that's quite high, and you'd have to do something to indicate that. Of course, you could have just written on the original counters. So that's a pretty minor upgrade. I suspect a lot of the changes are minor like that. Another one was the victory point markers, the 1 times victory point markers. Now they have a plus 1/2 written on them, because you can get half victory points. Well, you can mark that by putting it halfway between the two or whatever. Other games have gotten away with that. It's just there's so many of those little things, and then some bigger things, that I think they made the decision to try to clean it up as much as possible. I don't know that they succeeded with the rule book, at least. You have artillery, which is kind of cool in this game because it's fully capturable. And if you've studied the era at all, you realize that's really the case. The artillery wasn't so much a military profession. Artillerists tended to be civilians. And on top of that, the guns themselves were so expensive and so valuable that fixing damaged guns, etc., was an important thing. So if you overrun the enemy, you often got his guns because they were being dragged by oxen and not very maneuverable. So there's a lot of cool stuff like that, surrounding it. And that's exactly what I expect from Ben Hall. He's the guy who did the Musket and Pike series. I have a bunch of them over there, which is absolutely outstanding, especially the games that he designed. Some of the later designers who have used the system, I think, have pushed it more into exploring the edge cases of the terrain and the maneuver capabilities in it. And I think they've gotten a lot of realism out of the system. Maybe realism that Ben had kind of abstracted away, but without changing the rules, just changing making the terrain a little bit more imposing. And it ends up making the battles harder to play out. It's not as much fun as I like anymore. Maybe more historically accurate, though. I've certainly heard that argument. You have these detachments, which are which are only really meant to support garrisons. Each garrison on the board, these little markers, they're going to have a unit under them. And those units could be as weak as a detachment, which is all the units have 2 numbers on them. The first number is its firepower, and the second number is how many steps it is. Now, you could pick up detachments and carry them around with you, but in general, they're meant for the garrison. Well, it would be pretty unlikely that you're able to do that, but we'll talk about that later. Okay. You also have columns, which are your big, kind of like the leaders in Nappy Wars or whatever, these big counters standing up in their plastic thing. Those are the big armies moving around on the board. It really distinguishes them. There aren't going to be a lot. No player is allowed to have more than 4 columns on the board at any one time. The idea of that being each army is composed of maybe 2 columns, and 1 column for the main force of the army and 1 column for kind of a cav screening and foraging force. This first scenario doesn't really set up that way. We have 2 main armies that are kind of separated for the Swedes, and 2 main armies for the pro-imperial forces, and then this doinky little crack infantry unit that is the left behind, and they've got a problem. One thing you'll notice if you look carefully, there's Swedes on one side and there's a Swedish garrison on the other side. But it's not like you have to trace supply lines in this game. You sit around, you move around grabbing forage for the most part. There are other ways to get supplies, but these armies mainly did not travel with a huge baggage train. Gustavus really started the idea of living off the land. This had been used in other campaigns previously, but he really brought it into almost a science during the 30 Years' War. And then Wallenstein also followed it up and actually, along with his own special innovations. So you have the column markers on the board for your military, for your big army forces. You have individual leaders whom, if they have a star, they're a special leader. They are going to have some, they're going to have a bonus every turn. And that's drawn at random from their special ability pool. Those are tailored per leader. Some have more, some have less. I can see, I haven't looked over the distributions. They're meant to reflect the personality and capabilities of the actual leaders. But someone like Gustavus has a big pile of them. I could see where a big pile may not be the best choice. You might be better off with a couple of good ones. You don't get to pick which one you get, rather than a more random assortment. It makes sense for Gustavus to have kind of random assortment. He definitely had some sort of streaky... He had some bad situations where he did not always do the wisest of choices. Speaking of leaders, this is I've got one grump maybe on the selection of the leader abilities, which is the Cardinal Infante is not given a leadership star. Now, this is the guy who won Nordlingen, and I'm not sure how you can kind of... There's two ways to justify his victory there. Either Gustavus was a total idiot, or because he was basically caught without an awareness of how big a force the Cardinal Infante had gathered. Either Gustavus was an idiot, or the Cardinal Infante should have an advantage for that. Now, that's the only battle that kind of fits this game. However, when he went up into the Netherlands, he was very effective there as well. And there's not a lot to say he wasn't effective anywhere, except that he had a lot of enemies at court who kind of slandered him, and his reputation got tarnished in some ways. Personally, I think that he certainly deserves some kind of special capabilities, given that leaders like Mercy are given quite a few. And who else? Well, Tilly probably deserves one. He had been kicking butt until Gustavus came around. But yeah, some of the choices seem kind of... obviously Gustavus and Turin are going to have, and Wallenstein even, are going to have really good selections of options, I would assume. I'm not saying the Cardinal Infante should be up at that level, but I do think that he's rated better than a normal leader. From what I can tell, a normal leader is about equivalent, except maybe for victory points, I didn't look too carefully at that, to a generic leader. You just need one. And I'm not sure why you need them, to tell you the truth, except to put people's names on counters. You have a number of different nationalities available. The Swedes, the French, and I don't know where he gets this flag from. I don't know if that's real or not. The French flag of the era, as far as I knew, was just the white flag. Maybe that didn't look too good on the counters, and somebody made the argument that we should have a little black cross on there too. I don't know. Oh, jeez. Damned if I'm going to know this one. We have a couple here that are... Yeah, that's Weimar. and the gray is Hesse, and obviously Spanish, Bavaria, and then the Imperial Regulars. Now, these are my extra siege work markers. In case I have more than 4 sieges somehow, I don't know how possible that is, but it is physically possible that, you know, there could be all 4 columns conducting sieges, which would be up to 8 of those markers on the board. If need be, I'll make some additional markers to actually put on the board if I need those number markers. Whatever. Okay. You also have your cards. I've shuffled these, but I want to show them. Oh, you have the initiative card, which gives you a series of a few little bonuses. And we'll go into the specifics of the rules in a little bit. I just reread the rules because the first time that I read them, well, the first 2 times that I read, first time that I read them was long ago and started hearing about the problems with it and was having trouble discerning what was going on. The first time I read it recently was just like a week ago. And it all kind of made sense. And then when I just set up the game, I thought, I got no idea how to play this at all. I better skim the rules. And they're not very long. It's only 16 pages. That's kind of impressive. If you start to, as we start to go through the rules, we'll see this is not a game affected by usual GMT rules bloat. If anything, maybe a little too little explanation's been done. Anyway, your normal cards. Hey, it looks like a CDG, right? Yeah, in a lot of ways it is. This is essentially your ops points. You're going to be spending that on the campaign activities costs to do things. Up here, this extra number here, well, these numbers indicate how much supply you're going to be eating. And that's based on the size of the column that you're activating. Now, the mechanism for playing these cards is a little different from a CDG, but not terribly. There's just some coolness to it. So a small column will only spend 2 BPs, cans of oil. I don't know what it's called. Bullion points. I have to look it up now. Baggage points, yes. Okay. And that includes camp followers and stuff that you're eating. But like a large column would spend 5 to use this card. It doesn't matter whether you do anything or not with the card. That's what you have to come up with. But you're able to do foraging with the card for 1 CP. So you'll be able to get some of the food you need, you hope, on the card. The card also has an event on it. But the event is in play in addition to the ops. You play the ops, you get the event. In some cases, it's your option whether or not to use the event. In a few cases, it's a bad event and it just affects you. Okay. See, it helps when I read the rules ahead of time. And when they're this light, in terms of size, it's much easier to digest them and remember them. Even if there are things that are kind of weird. Okay. The concept of initiative. Let me just look to see if there's anything. Okay. So the initiative is going to give you some potential bonuses. You can spend it to affect your chances of succeeding at a siege on a surrender. You can do it to roll again during a battle, and you can spend it to modify the end of the game in the campaign game. And as soon as you spend it, it's like the China card from Twilight Struggle. You hand it to your opponent, and now he's got it. Except that you get it back through the dynamic leader ability. Some of the leaders have the ability to seize the initiative. Whenever you win a major battle, whether it's a minor victory or not, and if you capture an enemy or neutral strong town, fortress, or strong fortress, which are the things that kind of look like fortresses. I guess the town kind of looks like one too. Most of these are walled towns anyway, so. And you could have just spent the initiative, handed it to your enemy, and in order to modify the die roll for the surrender, and then you get it back, which is cool. All right, sequence of play. What's the first thing you do in the sequence of play? You set up the game. What? I'm not used to that being there. Okay. Whenever a season changes, and those are the color zones here, all the forage markers downgrade by 1. New crops are coming in, whatever. Then everybody gets 10 cards. That's going to relate to 2 cards per round, which are going to match up to two of your possibly 4 columns. You can effectively manage 2 columns in the field. Once you go beyond that, you're going to have more trouble in planning what you're doing. Okay. The way you play your rounds, the person with the initiative chooses who has to go first in any given round. Yeah. And then the first person picks a column, looks at his hand of cards, and plays a card face up for that column, using the command points to move around, pays his battle points, and takes the event as desired if it is optional. Then the next player has to take one of his actions, and he plays a card. Okay, but like I said, that only works for the first 2 columns. Once you've played 2 cards in a round, from then on, you're going to just draw a card from the top of the deck after picking a column, and it affects that column, which can be really bad. There are some cards that are must-play cards, like an epidemic, where you have to play it first in the round on your biggest column. If you only have 1 column in play, you still have to play a second card, but it's a discard. Okay. At the end of the game, now this is someplace where the rules get kind of funky. Okay, if you make it to the end of the game, hey, whatever, the game's over. If both players want to quit, the game's over. Yeah, they had to specify that. And you total the victory points from any current map conditions, along with any victory points that you've gotten from winning battles, foraging on the enemy, stuff like that. At the end, okay, so the campaign scenarios have a first possible end date. If you're at that first possible end date or later, but not, I don't know if there's an ultimate end date. Well, we'll pretend that there is for now. But not at an ultimate end date. I'm sure there is. Then, if you're in the lead and you have no forces in the enemy territory, you have the right to roll the die, no columns in enemy territory. You have the right to end the game on the end of campaign die roll. Now this uses, I believe, a 10-sided die. I believe zeros are zeros. Okay. I need to take a break. My throat's dying. I'm going to get through this one without a break. Now I can take as many as I like. Because as soon as I take one, it's like 4 or 5 hours extra processing time over on the YouTube side. Because there's more than one. The video isn't just a single video going up and then they put it through a compression anyhow, but whatever. All right. So, the concept of a column. A column is just a placeholder for your pieces, and there's no real stacking limitation here, but there's an effect based on the size of your force. So, if your force is 25 or less steps, remember steps is the right-hand number here, then it's a small column. If it's up to 50, it's a medium-sized column. And if it's above that, it's a large column. Large columns are probably pretty unlikely. They have a high cost. You can see the medium isn't that big an increment. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Now, well, and basically you can split off columns, absorb columns, etc. The only thing is a piece can't move twice. That's formalized better in the rules, but that's what it all comes down to, really. If a column is only cav, Then there are some special cav bonus cards in here, which give them, I don't remember what it was, I've got it, I think here. Yeah, +1 command point and +1 on any foraging die rolls. That's for a couple of reasons. Obviously, cav is a little bit more maneuverable, although long distance movement, it didn't tend to be terribly better than infantry units, but it also reflects that cav was often used for foraging, because for the short distances they can ride out, scour an area, and get the resources in more easily. There are other effects to having cav associated with a main column that can help with foraging as well, but a general tactic in the period was to detach part of the force in a larger cav force and send it far afield to get food. What that's going to allow you to do then is that smaller force, right, is able to play its card, collect food. It can bring it back home to the mother force, drop it off for them because it doesn't need as much, and then, you know, keep going out. And it can also provide some advantages for screening and additional mobility of the extra piece. It is only regiments, it's only military pieces that count, I think, isn't it? No. Your BPs, your baggage points, each count as 2. So the more food you're hauling with you, the heavier your column becomes as well, and that makes perfect sense. I was hoping that would be here. I didn't remember it. Okay. Garrisons. Whenever you take a town, which is done by siege, you must leave a garrison behind. There's no real reason to take some towns. The smaller ones are pretty unimportant. But once you take it and you put a garrison there, you've upped the value for it. We can take a look at that here in the victory point section, I think. Okay, so victory points, if you take a garrison town, is worth 4, whereas a neutral town is worth 2. Now, town is not the smallest thing. Village is the smallest thing, which is just these little dots. There's no reason, in fact, I don't think you can garrison those. I don't think, they don't even exist on the fortification table. So town is the first thing that's a defensible location. You can pick up garrisons, but you can't completely denude them. Once you've got a garrison in a location, you must always retain at least a 1 detachment strength on it. A detachment is created by taking a single infantry regiment and you drop it down to a 1-step unit, and the additional strength point and step are the detachment of the right nationality. I don't think I mentioned this with columns. If you're going to have forces that are of a given nationality in the column, you have to have a leader of that nationality in that column. So there's one value. You know, for example, the Swedes here could not have units here. They can only have one column with Bernard of Weimeyer. They won't be able to detach those forces to any other column unless he goes with them, and he has to take them all then. The other effect of leaders, really, each column has to have a leader of each nationality in it, and if the leader has a star, like Gustavus does, he'll be getting each turn a random one of these. Now these, there was a kind of poor design choice in my opinion here. They just put numbers on them. That could be useful if you want to be more flexible. That could be useful in a number of ways. If they didn't have the leader's name on it, it could be useful. If you wanted to be more flexible about what's on them, I guess it's useful for foreign language translation, although I don't think I've ever seen a published GMT game in a different language. But somebody could translate the rules and the charts, presumably. Anyway, these are all fixed by the leader, and then they have a certain ability on here. So in order to figure out what your leader's ability is when you draw it, and to try to remember it or whatever at any time you might want to use it, you have to look it up on here, cross-reference it over to the dynamic leader abilities, and see what that is. These are repeated. This part's repeated in the rules, I think, maybe with more detail. This is not, and I kind of don't really like that solution at all. I find chits, even with one word on them, to be a step more than I like. I would rather cards or something like that, but I can understand with these. Chits are going to be easier to, certainly cheaper, but also easier to manage than shuffling a little 3 to 5 card deck, right? Each of these abilities is spelled out here. Some of them, for example, the tactical advantage generating chits, I have some questions about. I'll make it through as I like it, as I can. Baggage points. So all the armies start the game without any baggage points. They start each scenario, and this is kind of weird. So if you remember, if you watch my vids, if you remember some of my complaints about the newer Zucker game that I played, Habit of Victory. I'm sorry, Le Habitude de Victoire. Wow, I swear the other side is in English. Yeah, it's in English on the front. Interesting. Okay. Where are we? Right. If you remember with that, I had a gripe because some of the systems in the game don't really correspond with the with what's going on, like between the battle game and the campaign game. And here we have one of those, which is that everybody starts off with no baggage points. Now, in the beginning of the campaign, that might make sense. Maybe. I doubt it, but because generally that would be the time when you're actually the most supplied and actually ready to move forward, where you're not really living off the land already. The battle scenarios all start in that same situation instead of assigning a certain amount of baggage points to each army. There was something else that is also different, and I don't remember what it was, but that was related as the the countervailing issue is that you have no baggage points, and it's like, well, neat. So the system doesn't exactly. Anyway, the way you can get baggage points, in general, you get them by foraging, which is an action, and you'll be rolling on this foraging results table. And what you do is you add some bonuses, and the bigger the force, the better it is at foraging, but the more it's going to need. And then you get a certain number of BPs. You have a possible effect on the territory, or if the territory is already F1, you have another effect. Now, what confuses me here is there's no minus for an F1 effect already in play, which there probably should be, because that indicates you've already stripped the area. Somebody's already stripped the area partially. Whatever. The victory point advantage for this is, wow, it looks like it's an end of the game condition, actually. I'm not sure. That's not what the rules imply. What the rules imply is that when you place one of these, you get some points. But this seems to say, see, this says every regiment in the cadre box at end. Winning battles is going to get you points right away, as is refusing battles. But these look like they're meant to be there at the end of the campaign, which is not the impression I got from reading the rules. So again, another, little inconsistency, at least in impression. Maybe not in the designer's mind, but certainly in mine. And I may be able to find a clarification to that in the rules. I'm not going to go looking online for something because so many hands have touched this thing at this point that my own gut is probably as good as anything else. So your BPs are going to be carried around in your column, or you can dump them off with a garrison, or you can just leave them lying around. And if you leave them lying around, anybody can pick them up. To pick up a pile of BPs, and you can take as many as you like out of the pile, costs you 1 command point, as long as somebody's not sitting on them. Okay, movement. Movement's going to be command points to move along the little connectors between spaces. These guys cost more, as indicated somewhere. They cost 2 instead of 1. They also cost you a BP. Because there's less food up in the mountains. Okay. When you enter an enemy-occupied space, that doesn't cost you anything additional. But when you leave an enemy-occupied space, you have to pay an extra command point. Unless it's a garrison. It's a space occupied by a column. Enemy patrols. Now these are going to be kind of weird. We'll talk about these more in a little bit, but they're going to sit on a movement line, on a connection. And it's just a cav unit, which are these little triangles, and it's just going to be sitting there. If you move through that, it costs you an extra command point. Crossing rivers, where you have to cross rivers. So you can't cross a river where a garrison is sitting if you don't own that garrison. You're allowed to move from one space into that space and then to another space that's not across the river. So how you want to, notate which side of the river you're on, you can do that however you like. It looks simple enough. Although it may be harder in these places without a little sphere around them. Those little spheres are the bishop's independent areas, which don't really have any effect on play, but whatever. Just to indicate that they're not really part of, this is not part of Württemberg. Ulm is its own free bishop's territory. Oh, we're going to get to patrols in a moment. Okay. In addition to the garrison blocking the river crossing, if a garrison's besieged, if a city's besieged, not a garrison, if any city's besieged, you can't cross through the enemy's position either until you drive the besiegers off. What about neutral? Yeah, anybody can go through a neutral territory. The city will allow you to use the bridges there. Something like this, which can't be besieged, you can't stop the crossing. Okay. Patrols. So, like I said, a patrol is a cav unit that gets detached from the main column and put out on a movement transition space. It still counts as part of the column when the column's going to move, when it's going to pay for its baggage points. It has a small effect on enemy movement into the space. When you deploy patrols, or if you have them deployed, you're allowed to scout the enemy in order to see whether or not you know what he has. Let's see how that's done. You roll a die, you have to roll less than the firepower of the scouting patrol, equal to or less than, and then you're allowed to look at the entire force there. Now, the other thing that it does is it affects foraging. So each friendly patrol adjacent to a space gives you +1 on the table. Each enemy patrol gives you -1 on the table. If it's on a connector that hooks to your space. Patrols are all recalled as soon as you start moving the force, and they just join it. But then you're allowed to redeploy them after you're done moving. If you want to deploy them where the enemy already has a patrol, you fight a wee little battle between the two patrols. I think you're only allowed to send one regiment. I'm not sure. In any given space. It's not really clearly. Yeah, single cavalry regiment. It can be full or reduced strength. Foraging, I've already mostly explained, I guess. You roll a die on this chart and you get the effects. And those will include hits against the space. Now, is there any restriction here? See, I don't like... Obviously, you can't forage in an FP2 space. I'm sorry, those aren't FPs. FPs are something else. See here, there are this is what the rules say. There are victory points awarded for foraging in enemy territory. The victory points are awarded immediately when the foraging is resolved. So, what I would guess is when you put a forage 1 marker down, you get a half a victory point. When you go up to a forage 2 marker, you get a full victory point. If you go up right away to a forage 2, can't happen. Okay, it doesn't seem like there's any penalty for forage 1 since there's... I really don't like this. But since there's no forage 2 effect line, I just assume you can't forage in a forage 2 space. Yeah, there's a prohibition against that specifically. So, all right, sieges. Sieges are really the heart of battle, not of battle, but of the campaigns here. In general, like in slightly later period during the Spanish Succession War, the conquering of the cities is the big effect. The forces are just kind of wandering around. They might slam into each other in order to prevent someone from hitting the cities. If you played the 30 Years War down there, Europe in Agony or whatever, which is really cool. And one of the designers from that was the original developer here. If you play that, you'll see that very much follows the same thing. You don't really get many pitched battles. You get marching out with one side or the other, grabbing territory, and often it's just this circular, one side's chasing the other around and they're both grabbing cities as they go and nothing's really changing. So the way a siege works here is you have to have enough strength points on the fort in order, let's see, in order to open the siege. So that's going to be this column. Enough infantry, steps in order to open the siege up. As soon as you declare that you're starting the siege, and there's, I'm sure, a cost for that, yeah, open a siege here. This is kind of nice having the rules reference right on the chart. Too many games ignore that. So as soon as you pay that cost, you're going to get a chance at the surrender offer. And that's going to be based on how many steps of garrison there are versus a die roll. And there's no reason to have more than 4 steps of garrison for this. There are possible benefits from cards, from other effects here. There's penalties based on this. There's a bonus for the final surrender offer. That's once you have built your all your siege works up to the requirement. If that initial surrender offer does not work, this little reject will go there, and that means you can't call off the siege and then try for another initial surrender. That remains there until the city changes hands. That city will not surrender on an initial surrender roll. Theoretically, some might have, but there'd be a gamey tactic that would just be stupidly unreasonable, but very clever within the game, you know, if that rule wasn't there to exploit. Okay, actually constructing your siege works. Well, you look up on the fortification table how many siege works you're going to need to assault that location, and you mark that with the siege works required marker here. You put the siege marker itself, let's say I'm sieging Augsburg, I put that here. I'm going to have a column there to do that. Augsburg is a fortress. It's not a strong fortress, but it's by the thing. So I would look that up. Fortress, this would go on 22. Well, there's no 20, but I got this. The 1 corresponds to that, and now each time that I build up my siege works, I move this marker, and too bad these are different colors either. The number's not enough to distinguish. Forward. Now you can see that's going to take a long time to take. So each round that I'm in the siege, I announce whether I'm constructing siege works. I can only do this once per activation. Now here's one of those ambiguous rules. Though the player may build multiple works. Huh? I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. At first I thought, okay, well, I can spend an activation building one up and I can build another up, and if I've got 2 sets of works, they can only bomb one down. It just doesn't make sense within the context of the rules. I'm going to kind of ignore that throwaway sentence. I don't think it belongs in the rule book. Given the level of the errors in the original, I tend to believe that this is something that just slipped through, because it's not well explained anywhere beyond that I've seen. Okay, so you get basically 1 level for each time you do this, and you get 2 if you have a large enough force. What that means is this is going up to 22. It's going to take 11 rounds. Now that's not a ridiculous amount of time. It's a couple of months. So it's not like it's impossible to do, right? But that's if you have a large enough force for the doubled points. Otherwise, you're looking at, what, 1 per 33 rounds, or 22 rounds, which is starting to get pretty goofy. You're taking a big hunk of the game up for that. Okay. Let's see. When the siege work construction is completed, or the activated column declines to spend points for building the siege works, the defender can do bombardment and or sally. The besieging player may construct more siege works built than the siege works required in order to prevent the defender from blowing up some of his siege works before the surrender check. Again, not sure how that really works. I mean, yes, if you're building 2 instead of 1, that makes sense. But there's hints here that you might be able to play more than 1 point here. Maybe what they're saying is, you know what I think they're saying? I think they're saying you can play multiple points towards it, but you have to do them all at once. You can't, like, okay, I'm constructing siege works, now I'm fortifying, now I'm constructing siege works again. I don't know how much effect that has. So then maybe they mean you can construct it as many times as you like, as long as you only do it once. Okay, anyway, when the besieger makes his constructions, he can do a bombardment before the defender gets to do a bombardment. And that'll be under here. Okay, so the defender and the besieger get to use their bombardment. The defender is going to be dropping the siege works built marker, and the besieger is going to be reducing the requirement. So each city should have an inherent artillery, level, plus if there's any artillery included in the garrison, which would probably be pretty weird, but it could happen, it'll be there. Now, I wonder what you do with that. After the defender fires with artillery batteries for the besieger the besieger fires with artillery batteries. Okay, there does not seem to be a chart for this, so what I'm guessing is you use the normal combat chart here. Again, hey, let's make something up because it's not here. It's going to be spelled out here. Besieger bombardment. Nope, he uses artillery to reduce fortifications. Great. Yep. And this is about the point where the rules start going bad, okay? They were really clear and cleaned up, and I get the feeling that after 2 years of trying to clean up those rules, the decision was made, how much worse can it be? Or something, I don't know. But it's like after about, once we get to about here, which is about the halfway point, about 2/3 of the way through the rules, it's as though the people who were working real hard to make this rule book a little bit tighter and understandable just kind of said, screw it, man, we can't do it anymore. Now, I can't believe that, you know, they worked through it page by page, taking months on each page. The only sensible way to do this is to hand this to a couple of people who review it and write back, look, this doesn't make sense because of this. Now, they may have taken a couple of months on the first page after they got those initial reviews, but they must have had marked up, you know, rule books coming back to them from people who had complaints all over the place. I mean, when you're trying to learn a game and figure out how the rules are supposed to interact, you don't do one page and just stop. You read the entire rule book, then go back and find the places that still didn't make sense, like I'm doing here. Anyway. It may have just been too much effort to rewrite it that made sense. They may have been spending way too many cycles trying to figure out how to get it at 16 pages still without, without spending months per page, which is what apparently they must have done. Okay. Anyway. Here we do have it. Reference the sum on the combat table to defend any hits. So it is actually, there's a line there that finally gets around to it. Okay. If I grouse long enough, the rules get better, right? After the siege work is constructed, or is completed for the round, and the besieged point is garrisoned by the other, and if the besieged point is garrisoned, the player can sally. He chooses an infantry or cavalry regiment or detachment. That unit's firepower is doubled and totaled with the die roll. Consults the combat table. Any hits taken are on the siege work. However, the sallying force takes a step loss. This is not a good trade in general, but it might just delay the final surrender. It's not something you want to do much, though, because eventually you're going to get to where there's nothing there, and an escalade could take you out. Okay, the way assaults work is basically the defender gets to fire at the attacker once. And if the attacker's still there, the defender surrenders at that point. Now, in order to do an escalade, a surprise attack, you have to have either a card or a chit that allows you to do it. The firepower of infantry and cav for the defender are going to be doubled. He rolls once on the combat table, does his damage, and if there's still an attacker there, then he surrenders. Any victory points are awarded, etc. In addition, when the siege works are completed, and after any defending bombardment, if they're still complete, and any sally, etc., Then the besieging player gets to roll again on the surrender table here, and there's an additional modifier of just 1 for the final surrender offer, which will allow him another chance to take it. If he does not get that final surrender, he goes to the assault. He has to pay a CP and BP point somewhere. Assault of fortification costs 1 and 1. And the defender gets to shoot, but his units aren't doubled because his fortifications are so blown up at that point. Okay, if a surrender offer is accepted, it's essentially an honors of war situation. If an assault is taken, the defender is wiped out afterwards, assuming he doesn't wipe out the attacker. The honors of war situation removes that garrison to the nearest friendly garrison that can hold the entire garrison. And this is the only time you show the full composition of a garrison as they're marching out. Okay. When you successfully get a siege, the garrison must be established. You have to send at least a detachment, and you can drop a step off one of your infantry units for this. If you don't have any 2-step infantry regiments, you can leave a 1-step infantry regiment there as your garrison. If you don't have an infantry regiment, you couldn't have been sieging. Because if you drop below the minimum required siege level due to a sally or something, you're knocked out. Now, there's different minimums here. So there's a minimum to open the siege, and then I think there's a minimum to maintain it, which is slightly less. Huh? No, you don't need infantry. What happens if you do not have infantry? Mystery! Okay. If somebody attacks the besieging column, they can drive it off. But now, here's a little weirdness. Somewhere, I can't find it. So, if there's enemy units in your space and you're conducting a siege, you can't conduct the siege. You can't continue the siege unless you offer battle to each of the enemy columns and either defeat them or they refuse. Is that spelled out here? I don't think that's in here. Okay. Which, I don't know what that really means with this, but here, this is handling if the person who's besieged sends a relief force in which case, the besieging player gets a tactical advantage chit in his center, if it's a major battle, which is to reflect the entrenchments that he has. We'll get to combat in a moment. Again, my throat's going. On to the battle system. Like a number of games, this uses a little battle board, but you're not moving your pieces around on the board, etc. It's kind of reminiscent of something I covered recently. Cruel Necessity down there, which is States of Siege type design. I think it's fairly important, and actually a little bit like the sucker, which I'm always plugging because it's got some neat things going on in it. But anyway, it's kind of necessary in this era. But on the other hand, I would say it's also kind of necessary in the Ancients era. So when I look at a game like, I don't know, Carthage there, First Punic War, or I'm trying to think of another one, Imperium Romanum 2, I feel like I should really have that sort of center and wings formality in place. The thing is, in this era, what goes in the center and what goes in the wings was more rigid. And what that means is you're not going to get, as long as the rules support it correctly, and they do here, you're not going to get an imbalanced situation that allows somebody to, you know, put all their weight on one wing or something, and might end up being this weird gamey tactic that just breaks trying to do the battle board. Instead, there's some restrictions here, and that helps make it make more sense. So, a minor battle, you have two kinds of battles. The battle board is only used in major battles. A minor battle is if one of the two sides has less than 10 total regiments or less than 2 cavalry regiments. Otherwise, the battle is going to be resolved in wings. Well, all right, let's look at tactical advantage chits, because they're kind of one of the things I've struggled with here. The TA chits can be gained via card action or leader special ability. They can be terrain, field fortifications, charges, whatever. Each one gives the gaining player an additional die roll, and they're cumulative. Leader special ability chits may have special conditions attached to them when they are used. So it appears that the chits for the leaders, when I looked at these, so for example, cav charge, in a battle gain a tactical advantage chit. In the wing or minor battle, my feeling is you must play it immediately when you play that, which it wouldn't make sense otherwise, because there's no defensive position or anything that's going to carry over. If you say, yeah, I did a cav charge, and next time they won't come so hard, that would be hard to defend. So let's use some reason there. Leader special ability chits may have special conditions, yeah. Unless it's an aggressiveness-based TA. Now this is what's weird. So aggressiveness here, cannot gain battle, gains a special ability chit when entering battle. Offensively or defensively, and must expend it. So I think they shake up the rest of the chits and draw one. I don't know. It's a special ability chit, which is these, not a tactical advantage, but it's possible you might get a tactical advantage and you must play it in that condition. Well, here's what's weird, and this is what I don't buy, and what doesn't go with that, hey, let's be reasonable about a cav charge, right? Unless it's an aggressiveness-based TA, a player is not required to play a TA chit. He can hold it for a later battle. And the number of chits is intentional limit. All right. So the way that's worded, it sounds like I can only play the cav charge or the infantry charge chits during the battle. I get the TA, and then I can pocket it and put it over with my column for some later use. I really don't like that, but that's what it looks like it's saying. All right. So anyway, both players may play any TA chits they have. Now, having played one, it's used. You'll be getting that die roll, and then the chit will be discarded. Both sides may conduct bombardment with artillery they have simultaneously. After any step losses are applied for the bombardment, then they're going to do firing on the infantry and cav on the table. Okay. The winner will be the person who scored the most hits, including any from bombardment. Now, bombardment is handled here. You total the firepower of all artillery units, roll the die, and consult the combat table. Okay. Same as with the siege. So we're going to be using the normal combat table. It's just there's less firepower. But what's kind of impressive here is you get another die, and you get to cause some damage, and you get to cause it before the actual regular fighting. Okay. Anyway, whoever took the most losses loses. Otherwise, highest modified die roll. The sum of the die roll plus any additional dice plus the firepower. I assume that doesn't include the artillery fire. Or if still tied, then the largest remaining column in infantry and cav steps. If it's still tied after that, the defender wins. That seems pretty unlikely at that point, but slight advantage. All the step losses are applied with any excess losses ignored. The defeated column if it has the same or more cav regiments, can retain its baggage and artillery and retreat a space away. Or it can voluntarily abandon them and retreat 2 spaces. Otherwise, the defeated column must abandon baggage and artillery and retreat 2 spaces. The side that wins gets something called a fatigue point. Well, we don't have fatigue point markers, but we have these things, and we could use them there. Are they what's meant to be used for? No, those are forage markers. Oh, they're supposed to be fatigue point markers. I lie again. All right. Huh. Well, oh, there they are. All right, great. Let me get them out of there. Okay. Okay. We'll talk about fatigue points in a moment. There's other ways you can get them. Okay. So that's the minor battle. The major battle is a little more complicated. You have to divide into wings. The attacker forms his force by placing all his infantry and artillery in the center and dividing his cav evenly, left and right, with an odd regiment going to the right. The defender does the same thing. The defender may play an entrenchment leader special ability chit if he chooses. Next, the attacker and defender choose whether to play a TA chit from a tactical advantage card special action or not, and if so, places it in a wing. Okay, no discussion about the other TA chits. I don't know if you're not allowed to play them. It doesn't look like it's the case here. So like cav charge, in battle gains a tactical advantage in any wing or minor battle that has more cav than infantry. I think it's any wing. Yeah. And the leader must be with that wing. Okay. All right. Then the attacker gets to reposition. His cavalry, up to half of it, can be moved from left or right wing to the other. Up to half the infantry can be split between the left and or right. Well, okay. I guess you get to position it as you like, or proportion it as you like between them. The defender then does the same procedure. After all pre-battle maneuver is completed, the attacker and then the defender may play any leader special ability chits, giving them TA chits at the appropriate wing. Okay, so that's why you can't do that. So you put the defensive entrenchments in the center. You have to declare them first before any of the other chits are going to be coming out. Then the attacker gets to bombard, as does the defender. You're not allowed to take casualties on the artillery here, or anywhere else really. So it doesn't really matter what the ordering is. And they just bombard at the center, center to center. If you wipe the enemy out, well, anything extra doesn't count. Okay, then the attacker's right is resolved first, with all casualties applied, then his left. Both sides total their firepower of their infantry and cav, roll. If one side is eliminated, the other side wins. Otherwise, the winner is most hits, or if tied, modified die roll, plus additional dice, plus firepower, or largest remaining troops, or the defender. Same order as before. All the hits are applied as losses, and any unsatisfied losses will be ignored. The victorious player from the right can then use his remaining cavalry to reinforce the center. And this also happens with the left. Basically, it's assumed that the flanks collapse during the course of the battle, and whichever side wins gets an outflanking advantage. That's a little simplistic, but if you've played musket and pike, it's often the case. Okay. Then when we go to the main battle in the center, both sides total their firepower of their infantry and cavalry. Remember, the bombard has already happened. And apply any hits from bombardment, after applying hits from bombardment. and roll on the combat table. If one side is eliminated, we go through the same order of losses here. Now, what's not clear here is the largest remaining number of infantry and cavalry steps. Does that include the reinforcing forces? That's low on the tiebreaker list. I'm going to say yes, but it is ambiguous. Okay, so a major battle is a minor major battle. It's a minor victory if you only win 2 wings. If you win all 3 wings, you get a major battle. The defeated column retreats, and the victorious column is assessed fatigue. For a minor victory, the defeated column may retain its BPs and artillery and retreat 1 space. Doesn't matter with the cav anymore here. Or it can voluntarily abandon them and retreat 2 spaces. If it wins a major victory in a major battle, it's going to take the winner's going to take 2 fatigue points. For a major victory, the defeated column loses its baggage and has to retreat 2 spaces. So a little difference between the two. Oh, wait. So remember, a column that wins a minor victory in a major battle. Oh, no. So minor battle assesses 1 fatigue point. A minor victory in a major battle is 2 fatigue points. A major victory is 3. Any played TA chits are discarded. Then, if you're victorious at the battle, in the following round, before you move, and there's no chit for this that I notice, and after burning off any fatigue points, you immediately can use CPs as if you had a reinforcements card. Well, that's great. I hope that's explained somewhere. Card special actions, yeah. So you can flip reduced, and it's actually explained there too. You can flip reduced regiments at 1 CP or reconstitute a regiment from a cadre at 3 CPs and a BP. Or you can bring reinforcements in if available. Okay, well, you're not going to be able to bring reinforcements in. All right. And this is to indicate, hey, some of the forces were mercenary forces. Some of the troops were willing to switch sides, even if they weren't mercenaries, etc. Artillery and BP that are abandoned can be captured. The artillery just flips to a different country's units. Counter limits apply, so if there are no artillery left to replace the captured ones, the excess are forfeited. You could also choose to destroy these. What's not clear is whether or not there's a cost for BPs that you gain. Oh, by the way, I don't know if I explained the other ways of getting BPs. So you normally get them by foraging. You can win them in battles like this. You also, every time when you take a fortress, if you take it in an initial surrender, you get some BPs from that. If you take it in the final surrender, you don't, because they ate everything already. Okay. Step losses are distributed by the owning player in all conditions. It has to be in the wing. First, a veteran regiment must take the first hit. Then all units have to be reduced before any get eliminated and placed in the cadre box. Each detachment removed satisfies a step loss. I don't know where they come in on that. But you probably don't have many in battle. If all infantry and cav units are eliminated, any excess losses are ignored. Artillery cannot be used for losses. Reduced regiments and regiments in the cadre can be rebuilt with the reinforcements card or the recruiting. The card special actions are explained here. One of the important ones in an epidemic. If you have this drawn for a column at random, remember you draw cards sometimes if you have 3 or 4 columns, well, then it just affects that column. But if you've got it in your hand, you must play it as your first card play on the largest column, and then you'll take some step losses. And any other garrisons or columns, enemy and friendly, in the same space also take effect of it. Okay, fatigue points. So you can get fatigue points generally from battle. but maybe some other special cases. If you have fatigue points, you have to burn them off using your command points on a 1-for-1 basis. So on your next action, you have to spend and get rid of 1, 2, 3 fatigue points, whatever. You can't do anything else before that. Nationalities, you can have them stacked together as long as you have a leader with them, but different nationalities can't be part of the same garrison, which probably makes sense. We've got a sequence of play in here. We got our charts and tables. The siege and battles, well, the major battle at least, are spelled out because they're kind of more complicated things. And that's about it. Overall, like I said, the rulebook gets a little fuzzy about 2/3 of the way through. And it really does feel like there probably was some effort of, okay, we've put this through the ringer enough times. Or people reading the rules stopped commenting as much, maybe because the first set of comments came back of, I don't get what's going on. And, by the time they clarified enough in the early parts of the rules, they maybe didn't feel like they had time to try to clarify the last few pages or whatever. Overall, I think you can come up with answers that are not unreasonable to the questions. I do have a real question on those tactical ability chits. The way it's worded, I do a cav charge and I have that chit and then I don't have to play it. Somehow I've gotten some magical advantage that I can play in some other battle. I really don't like that, so I'm probably not going to do that. Other things, like if it comes from a card and it doesn't, say something on the card that convinces me that I should have it, I don't know if there is one. The tactical advantage chit. So this says gain a tactical advantage chit. The chit is lost if the column leaves the space. Again, that sounds more like kind of a defensive entrenchment or something, or good terrain, or whatever, being placed down. And to me what that means is, okay, that's great. How can I hold on to that, and not play it? I have the feeling these chits should be played immediately. This one in particular is one which stays, well, no, that doesn't make sense either. See, what's the advantage of this one is you can play it on a column, and the column is in that defensive position. The only problem I have with that, of course, is if you use it in one battle, you're no longer in that good position. You can't hold your entrenched position. Now, that may make sense in a war of maneuver, etc. Where it wouldn't make sense is in the sieges themselves, but you get a freebie there. Your center or the full battle has a tactical advantage there. So the idea of them kind of kicking around unused doesn't really work very well for me. Like, oh yeah, we were in good terrain, but we moved out of it, engaged the enemy, went back to it. But if we had stayed in that good terrain, we couldn't stay there if we won the battle. That's the kind of thing that I just don't buy, which it seems to give implications of. Likewise, yeah, the Cav charged last battle, and yeah, they got hosed because we didn't use the TA chit then. But boy, they're psyched now. No, I just don't buy it. I just don't buy it. And I have the feeling that, these are a few of the holdovers that probably another 2 years of development time at the pace that this was going at would have fixed. What's really strange is just how long, tweaking and tinkering this thing took. Some of it was delays in the printing, etc. But boy, did it hurt this poor sucker's rating. There's a few people out there who are like, there's a really good game here. And then a lot of people who are like, well, it was basically unplayable out of the box. And so it's got a rating over at BGG right in the low 6s, which is not good there. For me, if I give something a 6, that means it's a pretty solid game. I can't imagine this being likely to get a 6. I'm either just because I'm into the subject matter so much, it's either going to disappoint. If it gets a 6, it's disappointing because I am into the subject matter. But yeah, it's either going to disappoint or be on the higher end. And a 7's quite, a solid game. That's where my estimate is, actually, just looking at it. But we'll see. Maybe because there's some clever stuff going on here with the card play and everything. Although I don't know, how clever that really is. But it seems to correlate well, just from the read through of the rules, with what I understand of the period. Poor Cardinal Infante, though. And the thing is, Ben Hall gave him a -1 in Nordlingen. I went and looked at that. And that's a fairly decent leader. You could make a pretty good point that any army commander with a -1 probably deserves a pile of chits. Even that feels a little weak, but it's a game where -2 is a really good leader. I would put the Cardinal Infante, given his record, etc., in the higher end of the leaders of the time period. He's not, he's not Turenne, he's not Gustavus, but he's at that next level down. All right, up it goes.